Before we descend into the shadow world of 1960s espionage, where the lines between justice and vengeance blur, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. We are uncovering the operations that governments want to keep buried in classified archives. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a briefing on the history of invisible warfare. São Paulo, Brazil, 1964. The sun beats down on the Interlagos Reservoir, creating a shimmering haze over the water. Wealthy Paulistas spend their weekends here, escaping the concrete density of the city to sail, swim, and enjoy the fruits of Brazil's economic boom. At a small, somewhat dilapidated marina, a man watches the boats with eyes that are the color of sea ice, cold, sharp, and constantly scanning. To the locals, he is Senor Cucurs, a hardworking immigrant who runs a modest business renting boats and offering sightseeing flights. He is charming in a rough way, a man who clearly comes from a disciplined background. He speaks Portuguese with a heavy accent, walks with a rigid posture, and possesses an charisma that draws people in while keeping them at arm's length. He tells stories of his days as a pioneering aviator in Europe, of designing planes, of daring flights across continents in the 1930s. But beneath the tropical shirt and the tan lies a darkness that the Brazilian sun cannot bleach away. This man is not just a marina operator, he is Herbert's Cucurs. 2 decades earlier, in the freezing winters of Latvia, he was known by a different name. The Hangman of Riga, the Butcher. In the chaotic aftermath of the global conflict, thousands of perpetrators slipped through the cracks. They used the rat lines, escape routes facilitated by sympathizers and corrupt officials, to flee Europe for South America. They disappeared into the jungles of Paraguay, the mountains of Argentina, and the sprawling metropolises of Brazil. They built new lives. They raised families. They believed that the distance of an ocean and the passage of time had washed their hands clean. Cucurs believed he was safe. He had even managed to travel to Brazil openly, using his fame as a pilot to shield his infamy as a commander of the Araj Commando, a unit responsible for the elimination of countless civilians in the Riga ghetto. He carried a gun at all times. He slept with one eye open. He trusted no one. He knew that there were people looking for him, people who did not believe in statutes of limitations. What he did not know, as he secured a boat to the dock that afternoon, was that a file with his name on it had just been moved from a dusty shelf in Tel Aviv to the desk of the unrelenting Mayor Amit, the chief of Mossad. The decision had been made. The statute of limitations on war crimes was about to expire in West Germany, a legal technicality that threatened to allow hundreds of hidden perpetrators to emerge from the shadows without fear of prosecution. Israel needed to send a message that legal loopholes did not apply to those who had committed crimes against humanity. The operation to find Cucurs would not be a simple extraction. He was too guarded, too integrated into the local community, and Brazil's sovereignty had to be respected, or at least violated with extreme discretion. This would require a different kind of operative, not a soldier, but a ghost, a man who could befriend a monster, gain his trust, and lead him willingly to his own judgment. The hunt was on, but to catch a predator, Mossad would have to send someone into the lion's den, unarmed, with nothing but a cover story, and his wits to protect him against a man who had made a career out of violence. Tel Aviv, early 1965. The air in the briefing room was stale, thick with cigarette smoke and the weight of history. The capture of Adolf Eichmann in Argentina 5 years earlier had changed everything. When Eichmann sat in the glass booth in Jerusalem, the world had been forced to listen to the details of the industrial mechanism of elimination. It was a catharsis for the survivors and a shock to the international community. But the Eichmann operation had been messy. It had caused a diplomatic crisis with Argentina. It had exposed Mossad's methods. The agency could not afford another public kidnapping. The world was different now. The Cold War was freezing over, and Israel's diplomatic relationships were fragile. Yet, the impending expiration of the German statute of limitations loomed like a storm cloud. If May 1965 passed without action, men like Cucurs could walk out of their hiding places, reclaim their names, and live out their days in peace. Miramit looked at the photos spread across his desk. Grainy black and white images from the 1940s contrasted with recent surveillance shots taken in São Paulo. The young officer in the uniform, smiling as he stood over terrified civilians, looked disturbingly similar to the aging man tinkering with a boat engine in Brazil. "We cannot bring him here," Amit said, his voice low. "The Brazilians won't allow extradition. The Germans are dragging their feet. If we kidnap him, we risk too much diplomatically, but we cannot let him go." The objective was clear. Kukurs had to be neutralized, but it had to be done in a way that left no doubt about who he was and why he died. It had to be a judgment, not a random act of violence. It had to be precise. The target was physically imposing. Kukurs was strong, a former athlete, and heavily armed. He was paranoid, constantly checking his surroundings. He had fortified his home in São Paulo with high walls and guard dogs. He was not a man who would be taken easily. The unit chosen for this mission was the Mossad, the department responsible for special operations. They needed a plan that bypassed Kukurs's physical defenses. They needed to attack his mind. Psychological profiles constructed by Mossad analysts painted a picture of a complex narcissist. Kukurs was not a gray bureaucrat like Eichmann. He was flamboyant. He craved attention. He saw himself as a hero, an aviator, a man of destiny who had been unfairly maligned by history. His ego was his fortress, but it was also his weak point. "He misses his glory days," one analyst noted. "He's rotting away in a marina, fixing engines for rich tourists who don't know who he is. He wants to be relevant again. He wants to be a businessman, a success." That was the key. They wouldn't approach him as police or soldiers. They would approach him as admirers. They would offer him the one thing he couldn't resist: a return to status. The operative selected for the lead role was Yakov Mossad, a man of 1,000 faces. Mossad was a chameleon. He had been part of the team that captured Eichmann. He spoke perfect German. He could play the role of a stern intellectual, a vacuous tourist, or a ruthless businessman. For this mission, he would become Anton Quenzel. The legend, the cover identity, was crafted with meticulous detail. Quenzel would be an Austrian businessman, a former Wehrmacht officer, to appeal to Kukurs' sympathies, and a representative of a wealthy investment group looking to expand into South America. He would be rich, confident, and slightly arrogant, the kind of man Kukurs would want to impress. The plan was terrifyingly simple in concept and agonizingly complex in execution. Quenzel would go to Brazil, befriend the monster, and lure him out of his fortress to a location where the sentence could be carried out. A location where there were no guard dogs, no high walls, and no Brazilian police. Vienna, Austria, the city of music and spies. Before stepping foot in Brazil, Yakov Mossad had to become Anton Quenzel. A cover story is not just a set of false documents, it is a suit of armor. If there is a single crack, a single loose thread, the person inside is exposed. Mossad spent weeks in Europe establishing his legend. He visited the places Quenzel was supposed to be from. He acquired authentic Austrian clothing, cologne, and luggage. He studied the nuances of the Austrian dialect, distinct from the German he had spoken in other operations. He had to walk like a businessman who had never known fear, someone accustomed to ordering people around. Mossad forged a passport that would pass the scrutiny of border control agents. They created business cards, letterheads, and a paper trail for a non-existent tourism company. They set up a bank account with enough funds to support the illusion of wealth. But the most important preparation was internal. Mossad had to prepare himself to shake the hand of a man responsible for the elimination of 30,000 people. He had to prepare to smile at Kukurs, to drink with him, to laugh at his jokes. He had to suppress the visceral disgust that any human being would feel in the presence of such evil. "You are not Yakov," his handlers told him. "You are Anton. Anton doesn't care about the past. Anton cares about money. Anton cares about the future. Kukurs is just a means to an end for Anton." The psychological compartmentalization required was immense. Mossad studied the files on the Riga ghetto until he knew the atrocities by heart, and then he locked that knowledge away in a dark corner of his mind. When he met Kukurs, he could not show recognition. He could not show anger. He had to be a blank slate upon which Kukurs could project his own desires. The operation was codenamed Riga. The team was small. While Mossad would be the point man, the tip of the spear, A support team would be positioned in South America to provide logistics, surveillance, and eventually the muscle required for the final phase. But for the first weeks, Mossad would be alone in the jungle with the tiger. In early 1965, Anton Quenzle boarded a flight to Brazil. He traveled first class, sipping champagne, reading Austrian newspapers, establishing his persona from the moment he entered the airport. He was entering a theater of operations where the enemy had the home field advantage. Cucurs knew São Paulo. He had connections with the local police and potentially with other escaped Nazis who maintained a protective network, the so-called Die Spinne, the spider. If Quenzle made a mistake, if he asked the wrong question or looked at Cucurs with the wrong expression, he wouldn't just fail the mission. He would disappear into the Brazilian earth, another victim of the hangman. As the plane descended into Brazil, watching the green expanse of the landscape rise to meet him, Mossad checked his pocket. He carried no weapon. His only defense was the lie he was living. He adjusted his tie, checked his reflection in the window. Blue eyes, stern face, Austrian precision, and prepared to step into the role of a lifetime. São Paulo was a chaotic, vibrant beast of a city in the mid-60s. It was expanding rapidly, a concrete jungle rising from the tropical soil. The heat was oppressive, a physical weight that pressed down on everything. For Anton Quenzle, stepping off the plane into the humidity, it was a stark contrast to the crisp air of Europe. He checked into a luxury hotel, ensuring the staff saw him as a man of means. He tipped generously, complained about the heat in German-accented Portuguese, and immediately set about establishing his cover. He didn't go looking for Cucurs immediately. That would be too direct. A predator notices when it is being stalked. Instead, Quenzle played the tourist. He spent days visiting potential business sites, making inquiries about tourism investments, and leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that suggested he was exactly who he claimed to be. He rented a car, driving through the chaotic traffic with the arrogance of a European who believes civilization ends at the borders of the old world. Finally, the time came to make contact. Mossad intelligence indicated that Cucurs spent his days at the marina at the Interlagos Reservoir. Quenzle drove out there on a weekday when the crowds were thin. He parked his car and walked down to the water. He saw the seaplane first, a relic of a bygone era, patched up and kept flying by sheer will. And then he saw him. Herbert's Cucurs was older than in the war photos, his face lined by the sun and time, but the physical power was still there. He moved with a coiled energy. He was working on a boat engine, grease on his hands. Quenzle didn't approach him directly. He walked around the marina, looking at the boats with a critical eye, taking photos with an expensive camera. He acted like a man looking for something he couldn't find. Eventually, Cucurs noticed him. The target watched the stranger with suspicion. Cucurs was accustomed to people looking for him. Journalists, bounty hunters, vengeance seekers. His hand drifted instinctively near his waist, where the gun was tucked. Quenzle walked over, feigning a casual interest. "Good afternoon," he said in Portuguese, then switched to German, as if talking to himself. "A beautiful spot, but terribly managed." Cucurs' ears pricked up at the German language. It was the sound of home, or at least the sound of the power structure he had once served. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "You speak German?" Cucurs asked, his voice raspy. "I am Austrian," Quenzle replied, offering a curt nod. "Anton Quenzle. I am looking for a boat to rent, but these tubs look like they might sink if I look at them too hard." It was a calculated insult. Cucurs was proud of his work, but it was also a challenge. "These boats are in perfect condition," Cucurs retorted, his chest puffing out. "I maintain them myself, and I am an expert engineer." Quenzle looked him up and down, skepticism written on his face. "Is that so? Well, I suppose in this heat, standards are different." He turned to walk away. It was the hook. Cucurs couldn't let a rich European walk away, thinking he was a second-rate mechanic. "Wait," Cucurs called out. "I am Herbert's Cucurs. Perhaps you have heard of me?" "The aviator?" Quenzle stopped. He turned slowly. He had to calibrate this moment perfectly. He couldn't seem too eager. "Cucurs?" Quenzle repeated, frowning as if searching his memory. "The pilot?" The one who designed the C6? A smile broke across Kukurs's face, a mix of relief and vanity. The very same. I thought you were, well, in Europe. Quenzel lied. What is a man like you doing in a place like this? The trap was set. By appealing to Kukurs's vanity, by recognizing him as a pilot rather than a monster, Quenzel had bypassed the first layer of defense. Kukurs invited him into his small office for a drink. As they sat in the cramped, grease-smelling office, Quenzel looked around. He saw the gun on the desk. He saw the way Kukurs sat, back to the wall, eyes watching the door. The game had begun. The office was a shrine to a past that Kukurs had half invented and half remembered. Faded photographs of airplanes, newspaper clippings in Latvian and German, and model aircraft filled the shelves. It was the bunker of a man desperate to convince himself he was a hero. Quenzel played his part effortlessly. He told Kukurs about his business, about investors in Austria who were looking to build high-end resorts in South America. He spoke of millions of dollars, of seaplanes ferrying wealthy tourists from hotel to casino. "We need local expertise," Quenzel said, sipping the cheap coffee Kukurs had offered. "We need men who understand aviation, who understand the terrain, not these lazy locals. Disciplined men." Kukurs leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with greed. "I know Brazil better than anyone," he said. "I have flown all over the jungle. I know where the best spots are." "Perhaps," Quenzel said noncommittally. "But my partners are very particular." Over the next few days, Quenzel returned to the marina. He rented a boat from Kukurs. He went up in the seaplane for a sightseeing tour. This was the most dangerous part of the initial phase, sitting in a small, rickety plane with the hangman of Riga at the controls, thousands of feet above the ground. If Kukurs suspected anything, a simple push of the stick would send them both into the reservoir. Quenzel had to maintain his composure while the man responsible for thousands of deaths pointed out landmarks and bragged about his flying skills. "You fly well," Quenzel admitted over the roar of the engine. "I was born in the sky," Kukurs shouted back. "Down there," he gestured to the favelas and the sprawling city. "Down there is chaos. Up here, order." It was a chilling insight into his worldview, the separation of the superior man from the masses below. Back on the ground, the relationship deepened. Kukurs invited Quenzel to his home. This was a critical threshold, entering the target's sanctuary. The house was a fortress. High walls, broken glass cemented into the top, German shepherd dogs patrolling the yard. Kukurs introduced Quenzel to his wife and family. This was the hardest test for Mossad. He had to break bread with the family of a mass murderer. He had to smile at the wife, shake the hand of the monster, and act as a family friend. He saw the normalcy of evil. Kukurs wasn't a demon with horns. He was a father, a husband, a man who worried about bills. And yet, beneath that veneer, he was a man who had smashed infants' heads against walls in Riga. Mossad used this cognitive dissonance to fuel his resolve. Every moment of normalcy in Kukurs' life was an insult to his victims. One evening over dinner, Kukurs began to test Quenzel. He asked specific questions about Austria, about mutual acquaintances, about the war. He was probing for a lie. "You served on the Eastern Front?" Kukurs asked, his eyes narrowing. "Logistics," Quenzel said smoothly. "We moved supplies. Boring work, but necessary. I didn't see much combat. I was too busy making sure the trucks had fuel." It was the perfect answer. A combat veteran might be grilled on specific battles. A logistics officer deals in boredom and paperwork, harder to fact-check. Kukurs seemed satisfied. He poured more schnapps. "You know," he whispered, leaning in, "I had to leave Europe. The Bolsheviks. They tell lies about me. The Jews. They never forget. They hunt me." Quenzel nodded sympathetically. "The past is a heavy burden, but here we look to the future. To business." He placed a hand on Kukurs's shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie. It was a Judas touch. "I think, Herberts, that you and I could do great things together. But not here. Not in Sao Paulo. This place is too small for your talents." He was planting the seed. He needed to get Kukurs out of Brazil, away from the dogs, the walls, and the gun. The key to manipulating a narcissist is to validate their self-image. Kukers saw himself primarily as a pioneer of aviation, a Latvian Lindbergh. His crimes were, in his mind, a necessary and unpleasant duty, performed for the greater good of fighting Bolshevism, but his soul belonged to the sky. Quenzel exploited this ruthlessly. He brought brochures of modern seaplanes to the marina. He discussed the technical specifications of the latest Cessna and Piper aircraft. He painted a vision of a pan-South American airline catering to the elite, with Kukers as the chief of operations. "Imagine," Quenzel said, spreading a map of Uruguay and Argentina on the desk. "We fly from Montevideo to Punta del Este. We fly to Buenos Aires. You would train the pilots. You would select the aircraft." Kukers stared at the map. He was struggling in São Paulo. His business was barely breaking even. He was constantly looking over his shoulder. The idea of being a legitimate executive, a respected figure in aviation again, was intoxicating. "I have ideas for modifications," Kukers said, tracing a route with his finger. "The fuel tanks on standard models are too small. I could redesign them." "Exactly," Quenzel exclaimed. "That is the genius we need. My partners in Europe. They have money, but they don't have vision. They don't have experience." But Kukers was not easily moved. His paranoia was a survival mechanism that had kept him alive for 20 years. "Why me?" Kukers asked suddenly, the suspicion returning. "There are many pilots in Brazil, younger men, men without history." Quenzel paused. He knew this question was coming. He lit a cigarette, taking his time. "Because I don't trust the locals," Quenzel said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They are lazy. They steal. I need a European. I need a man of discipline. And honestly, Herberts, I don't care about politics. I don't care about what happened 20 years ago. I care about competence. And you are the best." He appealed to Kukers' racism and his vanity in one stroke. Kukers nodded slowly. The explanation fit his worldview. "I cannot leave São Paulo easily," Kukers said. "My business, my family." "We are not talking about leaving permanently yet," Quenzel reassured him. "Just a trip, a survey trip, to Uruguay, to see the potential sites, to meet the partners." "Uruguay," Kukers mused. It was a neutral ground, close to Brazil but across a border. "I have set up a subsidiary company in Montevideo," Quenzel lied. "We are ready to start paperwork, but I cannot proceed without your technical approval." Quenzel was tightening the net. He wasn't forcing Kukers. He was making Kukers want to go. He was dangling the carrot of redemption. To seal the bond, Quenzel staged a test. He told Kukers that he had to fly to another city in Brazil for a meeting and asked Kukers to review some engine schematics while he was gone. When Quenzel returned, he praised Kukers' insights extravagantly. "You saved us thousands of dollars with this observation," Quenzel lied. "My partners are impressed. They want to meet you." Kukers began to relax. He started to see Quenzel not just as a business partner, but as a protege. He began to lower his guard, leaving his gun in the drawer more often, inviting Quenzel over for weekends. But for Mossad, the strain was becoming unbearable. Every moment with Kukers was a performance. He had to laugh at anti-Semitic jokes. He had to listen to Kukers justify the slaughter of civilians as partisan warfare. He had to suppress the urge to strangle the man right there at the dinner table. He reported back to Tel Aviv via secure channels. "The subject is hooked, but he is heavy. He requires a lot of line. We need to prepare the landing site." The landing site was Montevideo. A team of Mossad operatives was already en route. They were renting a secluded villa. They were preparing the room. Quenzel had one final push to make. He needed to get Kukers on a plane to Uruguay. "I am going to Montevideo next week," Quenzel announced one afternoon. "I have the money. I have the contracts. If you want in, Herberts, you have to come with me. If not, I will have to find someone else." It was the ultimatum. The fear of missing out battled with the fear of exposure. Kukers looked at the rotting boats in his marina, at the heat haze over the water, at the small life he was leading. "I will come," Kukers said. The hangman had signed his own death warrant. The trap was set, but the mechanism was delicate. Anton Quenzel knew that even though Kukers had verbally agreed to the trip, The days leading up to the departure were the most critical. Doubt is a creeping vine. It grows in the silence of the night. Quenzel increased the tempo. He didn't give Kukurs time to think. He flooded him with paperwork, fake contracts, blueprints for hangars in Montevideo, lists of potential aircraft to purchase. He created a whirlwind of business activity that demanded Kukur's constant attention. "We need to decide on the logo," Quenzel said, showing him sketches. "I was thinking something with a condor. Powerful. Dominant." "A condor is good," Kukurs agreed, his eyes lighting up. He was already imagining the logo painted on the tail of a fleet of aircraft. Quenzel also played on Kukurs's financial insecurities. He knew the marina was struggling. He casually mentioned the salary for the chief of operations position, a sum that was astronomical compared to what Kukurs was earning. "Of course, the first payment will be made in Montevideo upon signing," Quenzel added. "In US dollars. Cash. Greed is a powerful silencer of intuition." Kukurs began to pack, but he was still the hangman. He cleaned his pistol. He packed it in his suitcase. He told his wife he was going on a business trip, but he left instructions on what to do if he didn't call at specific times. Meanwhile, in Montevideo, the Mossad support team, the executors, had arrived. They were a grim, focused group. They rented a villa in a quiet, upscale suburb called Carrasco. The house was isolated, surrounded by trees. It was named Casa de Mayo. They began to prepare the office. They stripped a room of furniture. They soundproofed the windows with heavy drapes. They brought in a large trunk. They weren't planning on staying long. Back in Sao Paulo, Quenzel sensed a change in Kukurs. The target was becoming erratic. One moment he was enthusiastic. The next he was sullen and suspicious. "Why can't your partners come here?" Kukurs demanded one evening. "Because the money is in Uruguay," Quenzel retorted, feigning annoyance. "And the tax laws in Brazil are a nightmare. Look, Herberts, if you are afraid to travel, tell me. I have a German pilot in Argentina who is begging for this job." "I am not afraid," Kukurs snapped. His pride was his trigger. "I have flown through anti-aircraft fire. I am not afraid of a business trip." "Good, then we fly on Tuesday." Quenzel bought the tickets. First class. Varig Airlines. He kept the tickets in his possession until the last minute, maintaining control over the logistics. The night before the flight, Quenzel couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his hotel room. He was about to lead a man to his death. He knew Kukurs deserved it 1,000 times over. He thought of the children in the Riga ghetto. He thought of the mass graves in the Rumbala forest. But the act of betrayal, the intimacy of it, weighed on him. He was using friendship as a weapon. It was necessary, he told himself. It was justice. But it was cold work. The morning of the flight, Kukurs arrived at the airport wearing a suit that was slightly too large for him, trying to look the part of the international executive. But his eyes were darting everywhere. He checked the faces of the people in the terminal. He checked the exits. Quenzel met him with a wide smile and a firm handshake. "Today is the first day of the rest of our lives, Herberts." They boarded the plane. As they taxied, Kukurs insisted on sitting by the window, watching the ground crew. He was looking for sabotage. He was looking for agents. During the flight to Montevideo, Kukurs drank heavily. Alcohol usually loosened his tongue, but today it seemed to sharpen his paranoia. "You know," Kukurs said, staring out at the clouds, "the Jews have a long memory. They tried to kidnap me once before. Did you know that?" "Is that so?" Quenzel asked, turning a page of his magazine. "Yes, they are rats. They hide in the shadows. But I am a wolf. I smell them." He turned to look at Quenzel, his eyes bleary but intense. "I smell them." Quenzel didn't flinch. He laughed. "Herberts, you see ghosts. You are going to be a rich man. Rich men don't worry about ghosts. They hire security." When they landed in Montevideo, the tension ratcheted up. Kukurs refused to get into a taxi immediately. He wanted to wait, to see who was watching. Quenzel had to coax him, joking about his combat nerves. They checked into a hotel in downtown Montevideo. The plan was to take Kukurs to the office, the safe house, immediately. But Kukurs balked. He wanted to shower. He wanted to rest. "We meet the partners in 2 hours. Quensley said firmly. "They are waiting at the office." "Let them wait," Kukurs grumbled. Quensley had to improvise. He couldn't force him. If Kukurs sensed a trap now, he would run or start shooting in the hotel lobby. Quenzel agreed to the delay. He used the time to call the safe house from a public phone. "The package is delayed. He is skittish. We will arrive at 14 hours." During the wait, Kukurs decided to test Quenzel again. He asked to see the company's registration papers. Quenzel, prepared for this, produced a folder of forged documents with official-looking Uruguayan stamps. Kukurs examined them like a forensic accountant. He held them up to the light. He smelled the paper. Finally, he grunted. "Looks in order." It was a terrifying game of poker. Quenzel was bluffing with his life. If Kukurs realized the stamps were fake, the gun in his waistband would come out. "Let's go," Kukurs finally said. "I want to see this money." The drive to the safe house was the longest journey of Yakov Mejdad's life. He drove a rented Beetle. Kukurs sat in the passenger seat, silent, watching the streets of Montevideo pass by. The Casa de Mayo was located in a quiet district. To get there, they had to drive away from the city center into the leafy suburbs. The isolation was necessary for the operation, but it triggered Kukurs' instincts. "This is far," Kukurs muttered. "Where is this office?" "It's a private villa," Quenzel explained. "We use it for secure negotiations. We don't want competitors knowing our business." "A villa." Kukurs' hand went to his waist. He unbuttoned his jacket. Quenzel saw the movement. His heart hammered against his ribs. He had to keep Kukurs calm for another 10 minutes. "It's just up ahead," Quenzel said. "And Herberts, please, put the gun away. My partners are Europeans. They are not used to cowboys. You want to impress them, yes?" Kukurs hesitated. The desire for respect battled with the survival instinct. He took his hand off the gun but didn't rebutton the jacket. Inside the Casa de Mayo, the Mossad team was waiting. There were 4 of them. They were dressed in shirt sleeves, posing as office staff. They had weapons hidden, but they couldn't be holding them when Kukurs walked in. It had to look like a business meeting until the very last second. The plan was specific. Quenzel would lead Kukurs into the main room. The partners would be there. As soon as Kukurs was inside, they would subdue him. It was not an assassination from a distance. It was a capture. They intended to read him the verdict before the sentence was carried out. Quenzel pulled the car into the driveway. The house was silent. The curtains were drawn against the afternoon sun. "Here we are," Quenzel said, turning off the engine. Kukurs looked at the house. It looked innocent enough. A white stucco villa, a manicured lawn. "Who is inside?" Kukurs asked. "The board of directors," Quenzel joked. "Try to smile, Herberts." Kukurs took a deep breath. He smoothed his hair. He adjusted his tie. He stepped out of the car. Quenzel walked to the front door. He fished the key from his pocket. This was the signal. The key in the lock meant, "We are entering." He opened the door. The hallway was cool and dim. "After you, my friend," Quenzel said, stepping aside. Kukurs stepped across the threshold. The interior of the Casa de Mayo smelled of floor wax and stale air. As Kukurs stepped into the hallway, his eyes adjusted to the gloom. He saw a man standing at the end of the hall, holding a file folder. "Herr Kukurs?" the man asked in German. "Please, come in." Kukurs took a step forward. Quenzel was behind him. The door clicked shut. The sound was final, like the closing of a tomb. At that moment, Kukurs knew. It wasn't a conscious realization at first. It was an animal instinct. The scent of danger. The man at the end of the hall was too tense. The silence in the house was too absolute. Kukurs spun around, reaching for his gun. He was fast. Incredibly fast for a man of his age. "Traitor!" he screamed at Quenzel. But the trap had sprung. From the side doors, 3 other men burst into the hallway. They didn't have guns drawn. They threw themselves at him. The order was to subdue him physically first. Kukurs fought like a demon. He was a large man, desperate and fueled by adrenaline. He struck one operative in the face, sending him reeling. He kicked another in the knee. He was trying to draw his gun, his fingers clawing at the leather holster. Quenzel threw himself into the fray, grabbing Kukurs' arm. "Don't let him shoot!" he yelled. The hallway became a mass of struggling bodies. It was brutal, close-quarters combat. There was no elegance here. It was the raw struggle for survival. Kukurs was roaring, a guttural sound of rage and fear. He bit, he gouged. One of the Mossad agents managed to get a grip on Kukurs's gun hand, twisting it violently. The gun clattered to the floor. But Kukurs was still dangerous. He grabbed an agent by the throat, squeezing with lethal force. "Head! Hit his head!" someone shouted. One of the operatives drew a hammer he had concealed, a tool intended for opening the crate, now a weapon of necessity. He struck Kukurs. The hangman staggered. He fell to his knees, but he didn't stop fighting. He was trying to stand up, blood streaming down his face. He looked at Quenzel, his eyes filled with a terrible recognition. "You," Kukurs wheezed. This was not the clean, sterile judgment they had planned. This was a brawl. But the outcome was inevitable. The Mossad agents, younger and greater in number, overwhelmed him. They pinned him to the floor. The struggle ceased. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the men and the dripping of blood. The room was heavy with the metallic scent of violence. Kukurs lay on the floor, restrained but conscious. The fight had been brief but ferocious. The partners, the Mossad team, stood over him. They were bruised, clothes torn, but they had control. One of the agents, the commander of the unit, stepped forward. He did not shout. He spoke in a voice that was cold and precise, the voice of history passing sentence. "Herberts Kukurs," the agent said, "you are accused of crimes against the Jewish people. You are accused of the murder of 30,000 people in Latvia. You are accused of the Rumbula massacre. You are accused of the burning of the synagogue in Riga with people inside." Kukurs glared up at them. He did not beg. He did not deny it. The mask of the businessman, the aviator, had fallen away. The butcher was back. "I did what I had to do," Kukurs spat. "War is war." "This was not war," the agent replied. "This was slaughter, and the time for hiding is over." There was no trial in the traditional sense. The trial had happened over 20 years, in the testimony of survivors, in the archives of the commissions, in the memories of those who had lost entire families. This was the execution of the sentence. The agent nodded. There was no torture, no prolonged suffering. Mossad was not there to be sadistic. They were there to be final. 2 shots were fired, suppressed, quiet thuds that ended the life of the hangman of Riga. It was over. The man who had terrorized a nation, who had evaded justice for 2 decades, lay dead in a rented villa in Montevideo. Quenzel, Mossad, looked at the body. He felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The adrenaline crashed. He looked at the face of the man he had befriended, the man he had flown with. He felt no regret, only a profound emptiness. The evil was gone, but it had left a stain on everyone it touched. "We need to move," the commander said. "Clean up. We leave nothing behind except the body." The team worked quickly. They did not hide the body. The purpose of the operation was not just elimination, but notification. They wanted the world to know. They placed Kukur's body in the large trunk they had brought. They left the trunk in the center of the room. On the chest of the corpse, they placed a dossier. It contained the evidence of his crimes, photographs, witness testimonies, a summary of the charges, and they left a note. Typed on plain paper, it read, "Considering the gravity of the crimes of which Herberts Kukurs is accused, notably his personal responsibility in the murder of 30,000 men, women, and children, we have carried out the death sentence." It was signed, "Those who will never forget." They cleaned the house of fingerprints. They gathered their equipment. Quenzel took one last look around. He had to leave his legend behind. Anton Quenzel died in that room alongside Herberts Kukurs. Mossad would have to leave Uruguay immediately, shed the identity, and disappear back into the ether. They left the house, locking the door. They drove to the airport separately. By the time the sun set over Montevideo, the Mossad team was airborne, heading to different destinations in Europe and South America. It took days for the body to be discovered. The smell eventually alerted the neighbors. The Uruguayan police broke down the door and found the grim tableau. The news exploded. The butcher of Riga found dead in trunk. Jewish Avengers strike in South America. The message resonated around the world. In West Germany, the debate over the statute of limitations was raging. The execution of Kukurs was a stark reminder that if the law would not provide justice, the victims would seek it themselves. The German parliament eventually voted to extend the statute of limitations, and later to abolish it entirely for murder. In Brazil, the network of former Nazis trembled. They realized that the jungles and the distance could not protect them. They checked their locks. They looked at their new friends with suspicion. The ghost of Anton Quensley haunted them. Herbert's Kukurs had thought he could outfly his past. He thought he could reinvent himself. But in the end, he was grounded by the weight of his own sins. Yaakov Mehdad returned to Israel. He walked the streets of Tel Aviv, an anonymous man in a crowd. He watched children playing in the parks, the generation that was growing up free because men like him were willing to walk into the darkness. He never claimed glory. He never sought fame. He remained a shadow. But in the archives of intelligence history, the operation stands as a masterpiece of tradecraft, a story of how patience, psychology, and a terrible resolve were used to bring the hangman of Riga to his final justice. The world moves on. The marina in Sao Paulo is gone, replaced by modern developments. The villa in Montevideo has new owners. But the lesson remains written in the invisible ink of history. There is no statute of limitations on memory,